Welcome back to the Real Ones Canes podcast. I'm the Beast Brian London. He is Brandon O'Doy. Man, do we have a lot to get to. But before we do that, I got to let you know, you got to go subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I'm going to hammer it home every time. Subscribe. Go to Spotify, Amazon, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts, and go like the YouTube page as well. You can see our beautiful faces if you'd like to. Brandon, this might be the most jam-packed show that we have had since we have been doing this. This is officially episode 35, but we've done way more than that. This thing is jam-packed. We got a lot going on in the world of the Miami Hurricanes, and we need to start front and center. The GM, the OG, Alonzo Highsmith, has decided to leave Miami and go take a job with the New England Patriots. What are your thoughts there? Caught me by surprise.
I didn't quite catch me by surprise, Beast, because at the end of the day, I think the role that he thought he was taking at Miami and the role that was carved out were probably a little distant from each other. And I think when you have the love for the University of Miami that, and Alonzo Highsmith has, you have the football IQ that he has, alignment with the staff and being able to, properly have influence on roster decisions, recruiting, and those types of things. Even the style of play is something that you want to have influence over. You've done it at the highest level. You've played, your sons played, you're invested in the Hurricanes. You want to have an impact. And, outside of the mentorship of the students, and he mentioned that and referenced that, you can always kind of tell what meant the most to people when they're on their way out and they kind of share, what it is they have to say. It sounds like he was a great off the field sort of voice. He's a been there, done that type of guy, someone who served as a mentor. But I know firsthand that he would have liked to be more influential on some of the personnel decisions and didn't quite get to that, with this coaching staff. And that's fair. I mean, things happen. Hires and fires are made. He made a decision. He wasn't necessarily fired. He made a decision to go back to the NFL and pursue his path. And he'll probably end up being a GM someday. So there's no real love lost, so to speak. It kind of didn't become what they thought it would become, he and Mario Cristobal, and he's choosing to make a decision to move on.
Yeah, I think when Miami Hurricane fans saw Alonzo Highsmith come back to his alma mater, there was a couple things we had in mind. One, he would be that sounding voice, that mentor to not only coaches and AD Dan Radakovich, but also to players as well, right? He's been there and done that. But also, with his experience in player personnel in the NFL, I didn't think there was anyone better that would be able to help in talent acquisition, especially with the transfer portal, than Alonzo Highsmith. So if he wasn't being utilized in that way, I could understand him wanting to go kind of be used in that manner, especially back in the NFL. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a little upset that it didn't work out.
Well, I want to be careful in how this is characterized. I don't know how he was per se used. I just know he wasn't used in a way that he thought. He told other folks that, and those were conversations that didn't happen openly. Those were, I'm privy to private conversations that he had with trusted folks, and he didn't always feel like the best of what he can bring to the table, was what happened at the University of Miami. And so, I mean, we've all been on jobs where we felt like we could be doing more, having better influence, or we could do a better job solving certain issues and problems, and we're just, for whatever reason, not given those opportunities. And you may say, well, how is this guy not, a voice, and how is this guy, not able to have, the right amount of influence or whatever? And a lot of that can go into things we just don't know about: personality, professionalism, experience at the college level, recruiting issues. Just there's been a couple of different styles of offensive and defensive play since he got his job. I mean, you just never know. It's about alignment, and that's what I was saying before. Really good programs have alignment in every strand of the program, from the guys who are in player personnel who are going out and identifying the talent. You don't just go grab talented players. You got to have players that can play in your scheme. The University of Miami under Shannon Dawson offensively, is an up-tempo offense that likes to throw the ball around, and they run the ball probably a little bit more than most air raid offenses. As a matter of fact, air raid offensive gurus and people who are true to air raid don't like what Miami does and don't like calling it air raid because we run the ball too much. So at the end of the day, you got to recruit to that. You got to have personnel that's going to fit that. And then at the same time, too, you've also got to be able to bring people in that do what Lance Kirdry likes to do. Jason Taylor is formulating a defense that, where guys are interchangeable, either on that outside at the edge or, at the three technique. So you don't have to, you can't pigeonhole if you're, trying to scout this team where a kid's going to line up. A kid can line up anywhere. And you have to try to figure out to stop it. So at the end of the day, it's about alignment. And if the alignment is off, then it's better for, Alonzo Highsmith to not have that bitter taste in his mouth. It's better for him to go back to the NFL and do what's best for him and his family and just try again later or just move on, with other things. He's still a supporter. But, I think one of his biggest contributions during his time as a Miami Hurricane staffer was just to tell people, stop all of this glazing of what's going on in Colorado with Deion Sanders. We're Hurricanes. We don't need to be running out there and helping no less a Florida State Seminole, but also, just kind of, taking our talents and building up, another program. And I think, I get what he meant. I get what those other guys were doing. They were supporting Deion Sanders. They were supporting an African-American head coach who got to the Power Five, who came from the bottom. But, I mean, you needed an OG type of guy. That's not something Dennis Smith could have said. That's not something, other staffers in the recruiting could have said. It takes an OG to do something like that. And he earned his stripes. And that's what I think he brought. That was his Ed Reedish. You need an Ed Reedish, Alonzo Highsmith guy around to be able to say some things that other people can't really say, Beast.
So that takes me to my next question or point, which is, does Miami look for the next guy to fill a position like that? Kind of that OG mentor, voice of reason in the program. Is that something you think they look for, or have we moved beyond that?
Well, I'll give you a name that you brought up to me via text a day or so ago. Mike Rump is still around. He's still a first-round draft pick. He's not as OG-ish as, some of these other guys that have been there lately in Highsmith and Ed Reed. But, I mean, he's approaching OG status. He was on those championship teams. He's a first-round guy. He has NFL chops. He's been on the staff, through 3 head coaches now. But that is sort of a role that's been sort of created, and credit Manny Diaz for kind of carving that out. And it'll be interesting to see if Coach Cristobal thinks that that's necessary. I mean, he's an OG himself. He may feel like, hey, man, I got championship rings too. I mean, I played here too, So, we'll see. But I've enjoyed, Ed Reed and what he's done. And I think the biggest thing, particularly, and this is coming from, hopefully this, is okay to say, but I think when you have a lot of young African-American males from various backgrounds and they run into an Ed Reed on campus and they run into an Alonzo Highsmith on campus and they can be kind of guided in different directions. And, certain things don't have anything to do with race, but some things have to do with experience. It's not even so much I'm black, you're white. It's just, hey, man, you're from the Northeast, I'm from the South. You know what I mean? If I see another kid that grew up in the South, has similar experiences as me, I can guide them. Or we could be from 2 different areas, and we just had similar upbringings. We had two moms in the house, one dad traveled, we had one mom, we had one dad, whatever the case may be. Anytime you deal with football teams, you deal with culture. It's about community. Same thing here at the church. You have to, when you have community beats, you have to be able to align values and set a culture. And that's all this is about. Want to replace Alonzo Highsmith and what he brought to the table? Improve the culture. So if the culture became, he was that guy that players sat down with, talked to, he could get guys' minds right. Is he the reason James Williams played a little bit better or worked a little harder last offseason to do what he did? We don't know what we don't know. If he was a guy that was influential in certain, you have to replace that because now you have a void. Coaches have a lot going on. They have to recruit their position. They have to coach their position. They have to be administrators. You need off the field personnel to make a program great. So we'll see what happens. But if he created a niche and it needs filling, Mario Cristobal has to do that, and he would.
So just a couple of names to throw out there as I'm just thinking off the top of my head. If they were to ever fill some sort of position like that, if they were really aiming high and wanted to like a associate athletic director for football, a guy who's kind of quietly moved up the ranks in the NFL, I think this is actually a pipe dream, is former linebacker Glenn Cook. He's basically the assistant GM for the Cleveland Browns. I saw him in the press box at one of the games. He's always been one of my favorite Canes because he's so just in tune with so many different aspects of the game of football. He's one guy that I would keep in mind. The other one, this is completely out of nowhere, and this one just came to me, is if he finally ends up retiring from the NFL, a guy that could be that OG mentor, definitely has that cred, is Calais Campbell, who's won every single award in the NFL and is just a great dude on, off the field, knows football, knows everything that you could possibly want to know. I would put my attention there if just as a couple of names, but we'll see. Who knows? Maybe they don't even fill that position. One position they need to fill, though, is a defensive backs coach, a cornerbacks coach, a secondary coach, because Jahmile Addae has decided to take his talents to the NFL. That's a big loss for this Miami Hurricanes coaching staff.
It is. And at the end of the day, I am very nervous about this. I'm looking at my notes because there are some names that I was given. And at the end of the day, Jahmile Addae didn't get enough credit for what he did here at the University of Miami. And, I see on Twitter, a lot of people are saying, well, he couldn't close on certain guys. He wasn't able to get Kamani McLean. Kamani McLean's done nothing in 1 year out with Deion Sanders, arguably one of the best corners to play. He's done very little. There's not that big of a miss up to this point. And a lot of it's been recruiting based. But what team were you watching? He developed the heck out of Tyreek Stevenson, who came back from Georgia. The guy was a second-round pick. He's probably going to be rookie of the year in the NFL, or if not, he'll finish top 5 in the voting. Daryl Porter is an absolute stud. I think he got 1 ball, maybe 2 caught on him all year long. He was a freak. After having just like a journeyman average season the year before. Cam Kitchens came back to all-star levels. How many times do you get a guy that plays All-American like and then comes back and backs it up or gets close to backing it up? James Williams vastly improved. You cannot argue with results, and he got them. And that's the problem that I have with all these Addae haters. It's like, wait a minute, guys, let's not bash this guy on the way out. Let's appreciate what happened. The back end used to be a sieve for this team. You and I have sat in that press box, Beast, and watched teams absolutely torch and just terrify this Miami Hurricanes back end. And for one time, with the addition of Jaden Davis, whoever's responsible for that, these guys played. They played lights out. Couch had the best year he's ever had. He led the country in interceptions at one point. Jaden Davis was plug and play from Oklahoma, a team that had basically sent him to the bench. Daryl Porter had, all conference abilities. James and Cam will obviously be draft picks. They did well, both of them at the Senior Bowl. Jahmile Addae did awesome here. Okay, let's just close that chapter. All right. Never mind any of the foolishness you hear or see on Twitter. You got to look at results. So what do you want to have a great recruiter who can't coach? You know what I mean? Like, this is a big problem. So at the end of the day, I like what he did. He's going to be hard to replace. And then here's the biggest issue, Beast. He coached both positions. He had both guys in his room. Now, Lance Guidry is a secondary guy. He is a secondary guy. So you do get, Lance Guidry back there on the back end. But, Addae had a lot of the responsibility for the defensive back room from what I understand. So I think this new person is going to be a Guidry disciple. And I'm nervous about that only because he doesn't have a lot of ties to the Southeast. And so what direction could this room go? And I do not want a lot of kids running for the exits come spring, even though that would be a big gamble. It's safer to leave in the fall, but I just this hire's got to be right. More important, we'll get to the running back. I could have coached running backs at University of Miami.
We'll get to
we'll get to that. I'm not trying to go there. I'm just saying this is probably the most important hire outside of the coordinators that Mario Cristobal will have during his tenure.
So listen, when you look at hiring new coaches, you look at you look at two things, right? You look at recruiting, and do they have ties to South Florida? Like a guy like Nick Monroe up in Minnesota, and he spent time at Syracuse, but he recruits South Florida. Or do you think about a guy like a Patrick Surtain up at FSU, who obviously is from down here? Or do you look at a guy from Marshall, who Lance Guidry is a tie to, which is Chevis Jackson? There's a couple of different ways you can go about this. If you were, if I put you in charge, how are you looking at this job and what goes into making this hire?
Well, I think you sized it up pretty well. I think you have to look at recruiting. This is the hotbed for defensive backs. Broward County, we have some of the best defensive back talent in the country. So you need someone who can go in American Heritage, Chaminade, St. Thomas Aquinas, Miramar, Western, Central, and Miami Northwestern and say, hey, look, I need that best guy. You have got to have someone. I'm not so much with the ties piece because all you got to do is walk around with that U logo, but you got to be the right type of guy. You got to be a relationship first type of guy. You got to know what you don't know. You got to use community resources. You got to get up to speed pretty quickly on what's what. And then on the field, your product has got to replicate, what we've seen. You cannot regress. And this is going to be a transitional year because you're replacing two safeties, right? You bring back Porter. I haven't heard anything on Davis yet on whether or not he's coming back. But let's just assume he is because I haven't seen him declare for the draft, right? So you get Davis back, you get Porter back, and you get a good backup in, Devontae. But at the end of the day, you got to replace two safeties. And that's a lot of work, So, yeah, you got a couple of guys out of the portal. Didn't look good in the bowl game. This is a big hire.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And we'll see what happens along the way. There are some good candidates out there, but it's always just a tough decision when you talk about, hey, what relationships do you have in the high schools where you recruit and all of that stuff. There's a lot of factors that go into it. Speaking of which, go ahead.
I'll say this, and it's just buzz to me. Now, a lot of people are saying Pat Surtain, he doesn't have a lot of college experience. But one thing Pat Surtain would be able to do, I know he can coach. He coached for the Dolphins. He's coached at American Heritage. He produced not only his son, but he produced a lot of talent. One of them is Daryl Porter Jr. Okay. Yep. He might be a guy that's a plug and play type of scenario, especially given all of the people that were, recruited in the room, the current status of the room, right? You're not going to have any introductory reporter and the other kid that came from Heritage because they played for him. And, Jaden Davis is a Broward County kid. Again, no introduction necessary. Zaquan Patterson, another kid from Broward. Pat Surtain walks in. This is a guy that immediately commands respect, and there are not going to be any issues. So, yeah, he's at Florida State, but he's not a Seminole. He went to Southern Miss. He played for the Dolphins. He's a South Florida guy. I don't think he sold his house. Maybe he wants to come back home, be closer, to South Beach. He may take a pay cut, a hometown discount to come back and work on this staff. We'll see. But he might feel like he's in a good situation at FSU. I don't know what his career aspirations are. His brother was at my 7-on-7 tournament. He's a little bit older. One thing I know about Pat, he's an easygoing guy. He's a relaxed guy. He's focused. He's a darn good ball coach. He's not a Lance Guidry guy, though. So I don't know, but he's from that area. He's the Cajun guy. He played it, he's from that Louisiana, sort of, Mississippi, like Guidry area. And maybe Mario can marry these guys together because it's good for, Hurricane football. But you think Mike Norvell's going to let this guy walk out of the door? And I guess Gabby Ureta reported that he makes $700,000. That's a pretty expensive guy, but probably so was Addae because Addae was from a national championship team. He's probably making close to $1 million. So, I mean, you're going to have to pay up for this one.
Two things on Surtain real quick. One, he did grow up in New Orleans. And two, he did play a lot of years with Jason Taylor, who's on the staff as well. So there's some intimate knowledge there as well. They played with the Dolphins together and did pretty well when they did so. Let's move on to the running backs coach. So I don't know that it's official yet, but it looks like Miami's going to be hiring the guy from USF and Matt Merritt. And I'm a little puzzled, I think, by the addition. Have you been able to make anything out of this hire?
No, I mean, I don't get it. I don't know the connections, maybe with Shannon Dawson somewhere. I have no idea why he was hired. And it's no disrespect to him. I have no idea. For all intents and purposes, I hear he's a good coach. He's got some chops, helped develop some guys. It's a strange hire to me, but again, there are things that I probably don't know. But again, I think I've said this during this cast. I could coach the backs right now. Like, the room is amazing. Like, he's not going to be asked to make water into wine. He just needs to recruit, and he needs to just manage this room that's got a lot of talent in it, and make sure. I'm just hoping because it's him, because it's this dude that, doesn't really have notoriety and definitely has like no ties to South Florida, that a predominantly South Florida room doesn't get itchy trigger fingers and try to get up out of here. So, I mean, what's the room? It's Henry Parrish, South Florida, Columbus; Mark Fletcher, South Florida, American Heritage; Jordan Lau, South Florida, St. Thomas Aquinas; Chris Humphrey, Wheatley, South Florida, South Broward. There's a kid from Louisiana. There's a kid from Ajay, another kid from like far out somewhere. It's a South Florida room. And you bring in a guy that, is not affiliated. So hopefully he's as good as everybody's advertising him to be. I don't see it, but that doesn't mean he's not going to be good. I'm taking a wait and see approach. And like I said, I always give Mario Cristobal the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, the only thing I was thinking about the other day as I was trying to analyze this, I was sitting in bed at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling trying to figure out why this guy was hired as the running backs coach, because those are the sort of things that keep me up. It was, well, you know what?
I wouldn't have let Tim Harris get out of here. I just wouldn't. I wouldn't have.
Yeah. Okay.
I would have made him go OC and paid him more money.
Yeah. There is no doubt about it. I think both of us would do that. But the one thing I kept coming back to is maybe this is some young savant guy that's just flown under the radar. He played at like a Division III school. He hasn't had the pub that maybe other guys have. And somewhere along the lines, Mario Cristobal, Shannon Dawson met this guy and were so impressed that they've had him in the back of the mind as, hey, if there's an opportunity, this is the young gun, this is the guy that we're gonna find. This is the dude that's been laying under the radar that we're gonna hire.
Let me tell you why that may be smart. Whenever you're dealing with situations, if Miami has the kind of season that they could have next year, you could potentially lose both of your coordinators. You have to, when you get an opportunity, hire someone that can stay in-house, that can be promoted. And that would actually be positive before Canes fans blow a gasket. You want Guidry and you want Dawson to become head coaches, because that means this team is winning at a rate that's impressive enough to afford you that. You know what I mean? When Rhett Lashley went and got promoted from being an OC at Miami to a head coach position, that's good. That's positive, because that means you can springboard from this job and you're going to have people who are interested and who have pedigree. It's the same thing at Alabama. They have guys that want to go there and coach because they know it could be a stepping stone and you're going to get the top-notch guys. Because one thing Saban did a great job of, he wasn't just the GOAT because he was a good coach. He wasn't just a GOAT because he always brought in number one classes. He was the GOAT because he found a way to keep elite coaching talent through tremendous amounts of changeover year after year. It was known that people just wanted to go and get a Bama stamp and get out of there and go become a head coach. Now, who can withstand that much turnover and still win at a high level? And Mario Cristobal, who is one of those coaches, is going to have to take a page out of the Saban playbook, and he might already be playing. It's just the results are to come. So we just have to see.
All right. Man, so much to get to, so much to keep our eye on. Miami has picked up a pretty huge commit out of an enemy territory that we've got to discuss. Plus, you know, I think we need to discuss also what kind of impact recruiting might take from some of these coaching changes. So we will get into that on the other side. It is the Real Ones Canes podcast. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back right after this. And we are back here on the Real Ones Canes podcast. He is Brandon Odoi. Follow him on the socials at Brandon_Odoi. Follow myself, The Beast, Brian London, at Miami Radio Beast. And please subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast. And if you're on the YouTube channel, punch that, smash that like button, punch that subscribe button, and give us a nice little comment. All of those things help. All right, we got to get into some recruiting things. The University of Miami picked up a commitment, I think, for the class of 2025, a raw offensive lineman, but the dude has definitely got some interesting measurables. I'm talking about Lamar Williams, 6'7", 280. He's huge, but Brandon, he's coming out of Gadsden County, which I believe, literally, if you go out of FSU and hook a right or a left, I forget which way, on Tennessee Street in Tallahassee, and just keep going past like I-10, you get to this kid's high school. In other words, he's right out of FSU's backyard, but he is committed to the University of Miami. I don't know the story of this kid, but anytime we can pull a kid out of that area, I like it.
Yeah, that's a hotbed for recruiting talent for sure. Gadsden County in the state of Florida. But this young man is every bit of what they say he is, 6'6", 6'7". He kind of popped onto the scene at Valdosta State's mega camp this offseason in June. He was a guy that got coach's attention by running the 40. And then all of a sudden they're like, wait a minute, who's this tall dude that's running the 40 like a skill kid? And then everything you knew after that, he drew the biggest crowds for his one-on-one workouts and his position group workout as an offensive lineman. He's raw. They played him at D-tackle as a sophomore. He played offensive lineman this year. And, but he is a good canvas for Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal to paint on, and that's what this is. And they visited him during this winter recruiting period. They went up in January to his school, took pictures, and he decided to, lock in and become a Miami Hurricane. Now, his recruitment is far from over, but you don't just go grab guys like that in the recruiting class. There are no guys like that in South Florida. So Miami always has to be on the lookout for elite offensive line recruits, and you want to try to stay out of the portal if you can, develop guys on the back end while some of your top end guys are playing. And that's what you did with Jalen Rivers. That's what you did with, some of the other talent that you have on this team. You want to bring guys in. You can't. Every kid's not going to be a Malgoa and just come in right away and start. So I think this is a guy that'll take a redshirt year, spend a year or two on the bench, and then you'll see him, and he's going to be big, and he's going to be moving like a dancing bear. And this is a good get. And hopefully Miami will be able to hang on to his services through signing day in December.
So we spent last segment talking about all of the changes going on at the University of Miami. And, I saw yesterday one kid, in the class of, I don't know what, down the road decided to decommit. But, it's still so early for those kids that are sophomores. So much can go on. Recruiting is still wide open. But how do you see the impact of losing Tim Harris Jr. and Jahmile Addae impacting recruiting, and what do you think? Do you think there'll be a lot of fallout, or can Miami kind of salvage this thing?
I don't think there'll be a ton of fallout. I just think it does matter who they hire. We have to see how this running backs coach is perceived, by, the young kids in his room and how they kind of respond to his coaching. We'll find out in the spring for sure, because he's just walking around right now. There's no coaching going on, but at the end of the day, this DB hire will be significant. The guy in 2026 may have wanted to decommit before this. He just kind of used it as a convenient excuse. I'm not concerned about anybody decommitting in a class that's a year away from being, recruitable. But at the end of the day, there are gonna be fallouts. There are gonna be, deficits. Addae appealed to a certain group of people. So did Tim Harris. And now they're no longer at the University of Miami. So this is why you have a support staff in place. You want to have guys that don't have jobs that they can just readily go and grab as far as, off the field. And this is why you have on-campus recruiting, player personnel, recruiting, high school relations. This is where those guys earn their paychecks, because they bridge the gap between one hire and the next. And so when you have recruits out there who are trying to figure out, what's the future of this position? Do I need to stay committed to Miami? You've got to sell the program. You can't sell coaches nowadays. Look at all the kids at Boston College. They thought they were going into 2024 with Jeff Hafley as their head coach. Now they're about to find out that either Bill O'Brien or someone else is going to be their head coach. And this is life. And this is why, kids are getting paid now. And this is why they can move, because for years, people have argued it's not fair that coaches can pick up and leave and change the life of kids, and they have no flexibility. So some impact, but it shouldn't be too significant, because you should not be going to school for coaches, because these jobs are very fluent and cyclical in nature.
You bring up a great point, right? We focus on the assistant coaches, their impact on recruiting, the guys that they're recruiting, all that stuff. But that recruiting machine, that recruiting apparatus that's behind the scenes of all the dudes wearing khakis, right, in offices, and we never see them, right? I mean, certainly you have and other guys that get down there a little bit more have interacted with these people, but the fans really don't see these people on a daily basis. Maybe they follow them on X or see the social media, but for most of the fans and for most of the media, there's dozens of people that are involved in the recruiting machine of all of these colleges that we never interact with, and they're just working 24/7, 365 to keep these classes together, and they're really the ones that are like the glue with this whole thing.
That's absolutely correct. I mean, Miami's unofficial GM was, and is Dennis Smith, and so he goes by the name D-Train, and he's a guy that is extremely gifted in just sort of keeping the entire engine together, and so he's Mario's right-hand man. And so at the end of the day, those two work in tandem to kind of put this system together for the University of Miami. And then they have coaches and staffers that kind of manage. Mario manages most the on the field side and gets involved when he needs to. And Coach Smith manages the off the field side and does actually have some special team, responsibilities from the football standpoint. So they do a lot down there. And but that's the new day and age with recruiting. There is a lot required for college football coaches. That's why some people are choosing to say, this isn't for me. I'm going to go to the NFL, but at the end of the day, Miami is well positioned to replace, a coach and start to continue to add to this class. And, it's a tough thing for Miami fans because in these last two cycles, Miami really doesn't start adding kids to the class that are impactors until like the June, July timeframe. So you get to sit around. So this Lamar commit, this is a sizable, good sort of early, nice prospect. But the bells and whistle recruits, you still got about 5 to 6 months before those guys start calling it a day and getting in this class.
I want to give props to two guys who got themselves some good jobs. Ken Dorsey, the offensive coordinator for the Cleveland Browns. So we give props to my boy Kenny. And Dan Morgan, former linebacker, now in charge of personnel for the Carolina Panthers. He's got his work cut out for him, but love Dan Morgan, and he has done a great job working his way up on the personnel side. I think the last time Miami played at Boston College, not this past year, but before that, Dan was up there and had a good chance to talk to him for quite a while, and he's just an impressive dude when it comes to knowing the game of football. So we appreciate that. And then before we get out of here, I think we got to just for 1 second. Nick Saban is going to be on my TV every Saturday on College Game Day. And I know the rumors were out here that he was going to eventually replace Lee Corso. For now, they're going to be on together. But, Lee Corso brings the fun. I know he's older, but he puts the headgear on. He brings a lot of fun to the table. When I think fun, I don't think Nick Saban. So what are they doing to me? I got to watch this guy every Saturday? Come on.
I think he's going to give us some things to think about. He knows most of these competitive head coaches. I like the fact that he's going to be an analyst, but I don't want that desk to get too big. But, they can take people on and off for segments. They've done that. I think you're going to see, obviously Coach Corso come in when it's time to put on the headgear. But I think Saban is going to give us the matchups. He's going to put into real consideration because for everything I've heard and read about him, being on previous episodes, like when he's not in the national championship or whatever, he prepares. Like he's the same guy, like the old saying, football, how you do anything is how you do everything. Like he prepares as a college football coach and he prepares as a journalist. So I'm thankful to have new blood. And, obviously with, Kurt Herbstreit had been sort of the resident football coach and the person giving us like matchup issues and what we should expect. But Saban's going to take that to a whole nother level.
Yeah, Kirk probably needs to work on or focus a little bit more on his preparation rather than trying to get kids to commit to different schools and that whole aspect. Anyway,
yeah, that's a line cross. Hopefully that's not true, Kirk. You're my boy. I love you, man, even though I never met you, but hopefully you're staying out of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no doubt about it. If you want, just go Google Kirk Herbstreit and Nebraska, and that story will come up. All right, Brandon. I can only imagine what we'll be talking about next week. I can only imagine that it might be a couple of hires. Who knows who's moving on? Who knows who's moving in? Who knows what commitments are out there? One never knows. Something's always going on in Hurricane Nation. We appreciate everyone for watching and listening. Again, go subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Go hit up the YouTube channel. Until next time, it's the Real Ones Canes Podcast. Peace.